There's going to be Julie Finch. She's a Quaker, an activist, a preservationist, and a writer. And who better to talk about peace than a Quaker?
Hi, everybody. Hello, Julie. Quakers have been against war since 1660.
Yeah.
And I have this message from the Quakers in Ukraine. I copied it off the internet. Anti-war. I am really shocked at all of the pictures and all of the TV pictures about people being killed and being shot at in Ukraine. And it's so noisy here. And we want to negotiate. We want to not have any no-fly zone because that is really tempting to Russia. It's an act of war. I don't know what else to say. Thank you very much.
And our next guest is well known within the Irish American community, Brendan Fay. He wears many hats here in New York City. Originally from County Louth, or Drogheda, as some people call it, Drogheda. But today he's with the New York campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And in the irony of it, he's here 2 days after the bombing of a nuclear reactor in Ukraine. And also, he's a gay activist and a founder of the St. Pat's for All Parade in Sunnyside, Queens, which is tomorrow in Sunnyside, Queens, 43rd Street and Skillman Avenue. We'll be marching there with the Ukrainian delegation. We'll be in the parade. So I go to now Brendan Fay.
Hello, New York! I look around at all of you gathered here today to say no to war. I look at all of you today and I see that your hearts have brought you out into the streets of Times Square. I look around at all of you and I too am moved. While most people have turned their hearts, their heads away from the images of war and bombing, what you have done and always done is look towards the suffering and pain. And you are moved to take a stand for peace and to say no to war. I look at each of you. Let us together send a message to brothers and sisters like you and I, gathering in villages and towns and city squares, to say no to war and yes to peace. Today we send a message of solidarity to conscientious objectors, to Russian soldiers who are saying, I will not kill, I will not shoot, I will not go to war. Today we send a message to the thousands of people in Russia who are on the streets saying yes to peace and no to war, not in our name. I thank each and every one of you for listening to your heart and choosing tenderness over terror. You have chosen humanity. You have chosen life over death. You are taking a stand for the human capacity to love instead of hate. This sends a message across the world. Were you like me when you saw the images of the children in the hospital? Were you too moved to tears? I was. Because never lose your humanity. That is what is at stake. Death, war takes away our humanity. We are here to stand together. Solidarity, say no to war, and I am proud in New York City. We say no to war, yes to divestment. No to war, yes to disarmament. No to war, no to war. No to war, yes to disarmament. No to NATO. Thank you. Keep standing for peace. Hold your heart. Thank you for standing for peace, for love, for humanity. Okay, thank you.
And that was Brendan Fay. And our next speaker from Staten Island, the irony is that Brendan Fay can march in Queens tomorrow in St. Pat's Parade and on Fifth Avenue, but at the St. Pat's Parade in Staten Island, he cannot march. But we have Sally Jones from Staten Island. She's the Peace Action Fund for New York State and a founding member of the Peace Action of Staten Island. Sally.
As I said, my name is Sally Jones. I'm from Peace Action, New York State, Peace Action of Staten Island. I'm a mother, wife, grandmother, aunt, great aunt, sister. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. Peace Action slogan is peace demands action. The Unitarian Universalist sixth principle is to work for a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Like you, I am anti-war. Most people on this planet are anti-war. If all of us, the 999 of 1,000, the 99.9%, the workers, the poets, the musicians, the lovers, everyone, if we stand up and say no to war and every war, we can end the violence in Ukraine. All over the world, people are talking about Ukraine in the media and in their families. I hear it in my own family. They say, we cannot let Putin get away with this. We have to do whatever it takes to stop him. Are you hearing that too? Well, are we on a march to an expanded war? Pouring in more weapons, more death, more destruction. Forgetting what brought us to this brink. Our own country's secrets, our own country's militarism, our own heart to Russia's forces with bases and NATO expansion. The 99.9% of people who want peace and justice need to get to work and put the brakes on war. We need to close arms with our peace-loving Russian brothers and sisters who are risking their lives right now in anti-war protests. We need to call for diplomacy, for restraint, for humanitarian assistance for victims of all wars at every level of government, in all institutions. We need to call for a ceasefire, for negotiations. Ultimately, we need to roll back the patriarchy of militarism. We need to call out the weapons manufacturers. We need to support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We need to cut the Pentagon budget. We need to create common security frameworks. We need to continue showing up in the streets together, united for peace and justice. Thank you.
Staten Island. And our next speaker is Gillian with an organization, World Beyond War, a native New Yorker, the technology director of World Beyond War, something that this planet probably has never seen.
People of New York City! New York City! How sick are we of war? Sick! Are you sick of it? Do you remember the Iraq War? Do you remember the Afghanistan War? Do you realize the Korean War has not even ended yet? We don't need another war. The war in Israel. Yemen. We don't need another war today. We need to stop this war. We need to de-escalate this war. Both sides of this war had every chance to avoid it from happening. It's still not too late. The worst has not yet happened.
Let's come together, everybody here. Get in touch with your humanity. Put aside your anger, put aside your hatred. Get in touch with your love for each other, the love for your family, the love for your community. We need to come together and urge negotiation, peace deals, de-escalation. Take this down. Take it the fuck down. This planet cannot stand one more war. We have no capacity for one more war. This country will not survive one more war. And I have a hard time not believing this country is at war with itself. Thank you. I am Mark Elliott from World Beyond War. Cohen Pink is here. Raging Grannies are here. Awesome. Veterans for Peace. Zoo. Our friends in Ireland. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you for everybody here for being here because you love our planet. You love the people who live here.
Next speaker is Margaret Kimberly. She's with the Black Alliance for Peace and the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report, which I'm sure you can hear at some stage on WPAI. And we welcome Margaret Kimberly. And a bit, Margaret.
Power to the people!
Power to the people!
Power to the people!
Power to the people!
I'm here with comrades from Black Alliance for Peace. The Black Alliance for Peace is mindful of the loss of life in Ukraine, but also in Somalia, Yemen, and every nation suffering under NATO wars of domination. We offer our unwavering solidarity with the people of those places. Our concern for the people of Ukraine must be added to our overarching concern for those in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Honduras, Brazil, Nicaragua, Cuba, and other nations. We note that as the U.S. condemns the military actions of the Russian Federation, its armed drones bombed Somalia, and that black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean were abandoned and mistreated in the Ukraine. Black Alliance for Peace calls, obviously, for peace, which is not just the absence of war. It means having a world where there is no domination by one nation. No U.S. hegemony. No more NATO. Peace means that we have leaders who care about the people, who do the people's business, not the business of the military-industrial complex, whose stocks have all gone through the roof in the last week and a half. So we must ask, obviously, for peace, but it has to be a peace that works for the people. We are in solidarity with oppressed people all over the world. And they cannot live in peace as long as we have U.S. hegemony. As long as the U.S., EU, and NATO axis of domination feels free to destroy lives in Afghanistan or Libya or anywhere else. That is what we all must speak out for. So let us, everyone is asking, what do we do? What can I do? It's very simple. Tell our leaders to talk, to have good faith negotiations. Not negotiations that mean the U.S. gets what it wants. That is why we are at this point today. So, power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Let's all work for peace. Thank you so much.
Margaret Kimberly, thank you, Margaret Kimberly. Well, our next speaker, you can hear him on WPAI every Sunday after the show that I host with Malachi McCourt on WPAI. He's a former war correspondent for the New York Times and author, and he also has a television show on Contact, which I keep checking for before the censorship starts coming in on Chris Hedges here. They're talking about censorship in Russia. Let's start talking about the censorship that's coming to this country, and no one can speak better on that than Chris Hedges, and I'd like to thank him for having me on as yellow cab drivers on his shows a couple of years ago. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks. Actually, the show is off the air. RT has been shut down. We all knew it was coming. It wasn't because of Russian propaganda. Preemptive war, whether in Iraq or Ukraine, is a war crime.
Yes.
It does not matter if the war is launched on the basis of lies and fabrications, as was the case in Iraq, or because of the breaking of a series of agreements with Russia, including the promise by Washington not to expand NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany, not to deploy thousands of NATO troops in Eastern Europe, not to meddle in the internal affairs of nations on Russia's border, and the refusal to implement the Minsk II peace agreement. The invasion of Ukraine, I expect, and I was in Eastern Europe as a reporter in 1989, would never have happened if these promises had been kept. Russia has every right to feel threatened, betrayed, and angry. But to understand is not to condone. The invasion of Ukraine under post-Nuremberg laws is a criminal war of aggression. I know the instrument of war. War is not politics by other means. It is demonic. I spent 2 decades as a war correspondent in Central America, the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans, where I covered the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo. I carry within me the ghosts of dozens of those swallowed up in the violence, including my close friend, Reuters correspondent Kurt Schork, who was killed in an ambush in Sierra Leone, along with another friend, Miguel Gil Moreno. I know the chaos and disorientation of war, the constant uncertainty and confusion. In a firefight, you are only aware of what is happening a few feet around you. You desperately, and not always successfully, struggle to figure out where the firing is coming from in the hopes you can avoid being hit. I have felt the helplessness and the paralyzing fear, which years later descend on me like a freight train in the middle of the night, leaving me wrapped in coils of terror, my heart racing, my body dripping with sweat. I have heard the wails of those convulsed by grief as they clutch the bodies of friends and family, including children. I hear them still. It does not matter the language, Spanish, Arabic, Hebrew, Dinka, Serbo-Croatian, Albanian, Ukrainian, Russian. Death cuts through the linguistic barriers. I know what wounds look like. Legs blown off, heads imploded into a bloody, pulpy mass, gaping holes in stomachs, pools of blood, cries of the dying, sometimes for their mothers. And the smell of death, the supreme sacrifice made for flies and maggots. I was beaten by Iraqi and Saudi secret police. I was taken prisoner by the Contras in Nicaragua, who radioed back to their base in Honduras to see if they should kill me, and again in Basra after the first Gulf War, never knowing if I would be executed under constant guard and often without food, drinking out of mud puddles. The primary lesson in war is that we, as distinct individuals, do not matter. We become numbers, fodder, objects. Life, once precious and sacred, becomes meaningless, sacrificed to the insatiable appetite of Mars, and no one in wartime is exempt. We were expendable, Eugene Sledge wrote of his experiences as a Marine in the South Pacific in World War II. It was difficult to accept. We come from a nation and a culture that values life and the individual. To find oneself in a situation where your life seems of little value is the ultimate in loneliness. It is a humbling experience. The landscape of war is hallucinogenic. It defies comprehension. You have no concept of time in a firefight. A few minutes, a few hours. War in an instant obliterates homes and communities, all that was once familiar, and leaves behind smoldering ruins and a trauma that you carry for the rest of your life. I have tasted enough of war, enough of my own fear, my body turned to jelly, to know that war is always evil, the purest expression of death, dressed up in patriotic cant about liberty and democracy and sold to the naive as a ticket to glory, honor, and courage. It is a toxic and seductive elixir. Those who survive, as Kurt Vonnegut wrote, struggle afterwards to reinvent themselves and their universe, which on some level will never make sense again. War destroys all systems that sustain and nurture life: familial, economic, cultural, political, environmental, and social. Once war begins, no one, not even those nominally in charge of waging war, can guess what will happen, how the war will develop, how it can drive armies and nations towards suicidal folly. There are no good wars, none. And this includes World War II, which has been sanitized and mythologized to mendaciously celebrate American heroism, purity, and goodness. If truth is the first casualty in war, ambiguity is the second. The bellicose rhetoric embraced and amplified by the American press, demonizing Vladimir Putin and elevating the Ukrainians to the status of demigods, demanding more robust military intervention, along with the crippling sanctions meant to bring down Putin's government, is infantile and dangerous.
Yes.
And the Russian media is as simplistic as our own.
Yes. Yes.
There were no discussions about pacifism in the basements of Sarajevo when we were being hit with hundreds of Serbian shells a day and under constant sniper fire. It made sense to defend the city. It made sense to kill or be killed. The Bosnian Serb soldiers in the Drina Valley, Vukovar, and Srebrenica had amply demonstrated their capacity for murderous rampages, including the gunning down of hundreds of soldiers and civilians and the wholesale rape of women and girls. But this did not save any of the defenders in Sarajevo from the poison of violence, the soul-destroying force that is war. I knew a Bosnian soldier who heard a sound behind a door while patrolling on the outskirts of Sarajevo. He fired a burst from his AK-47 through the door. A delay of a few seconds in combat can mean death. When he opened the door, he found the bloody remains of a 12-year-old girl. His daughter was 12. He never recovered. Only the autocrats and politicians who dream of empire and global hegemony, of the godlike power that comes with wielding armies, warplanes, and fleets, along with the merchants of death, whose business floods countries with weapons, profit from war. The expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe has earned Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Analytic Services, Huntington Ingalls, Humana, BAE Systems, and L3Harris billions in profits. And the stoking of the conflict in Ukraine will earn them billions more. The European Union has allocated hundreds of millions of euros to purchase weapons for Ukraine. Germany will almost triple its own defense budget for 2022. The Biden administration has asked Congress to provide $6.4 billion in funding to assist Ukraine, supplementing the $650 million in military aid to Ukraine over the past year. The permanent war economy operates outside the laws of supply and demand. It is the root of the 2-decade-long quagmire in the Middle East, and it is the root of the conflict with Moscow. The merchants of death are satanic. The more corpses they produce, the more their bank accounts swell. They will cash in on this conflict, one that now flirts with a nuclear holocaust that would terminate life on Earth as we know it. The dangerous and sadly predictable provocation of Russia, whose nuclear arsenal places the sword of Damocles above our heads by expanding NATO, was understood by all of us who were reporting in Eastern Europe in 1989 during the revolutions and the breakup of the Soviet Union. This provocation, which includes establishing a NATO missile base 100 miles from Russia's border, was foolish and highly irresponsible. It never made geopolitical sense. This does not, however, excuse the invasion of Ukraine. Yes, the Russians were baited, but they reacted by pulling the trigger, and this is a crime, their crime. Let us pray for a ceasefire. Let us work for a return to diplomacy and sanity, a moratorium on arms shipments to Ukraine, and the withdrawal of Russian troops from the country. Let us hope for an end to war before we stumble into a nuclear holocaust that devours us all.
Bravo! 12:30 to 1 o'clock after myself we're on from 11 to 12:30 with a promotion. Now our next guests, two of them, are following in the footsteps of the Berrigan brothers and Charlie Sheehan, the Kings Bay Plowshares. Carmen Trotter and Mark Colville will be now addressing the crowd.
No more war! No more war! No more war! No more war!
No more war! No more war! No more war!
This war in particular could provoke a nuclear catastrophe. This is my co-defendant, Mark Colville, from the Kings Bay Plowshare 7. So we spent just a little bit of time in prison, in federal prison, for going to where America keeps a quarter of its nuclear arsenal to decry all war and nuclear war in particular. Mark has written a statement. The Kings Bay Plowshares have put together a statement to make, and Mark is going to read it for us.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you, Chris Hedges, for your brilliance,
Yes, sir.
for your courage, and for your truth-telling. Thank you. Today, the Kings Bay Plowshare 7 join our prayers with the global community for the people of Ukraine.